Welcome back. All right, so it is time for that video, that big drawn out video we do every year, and I'm going to try not to make this too drawn out. I also want to keep it kind of simple. First off, the reason why no Canadian team wins the Stanley Cup, if you can point at Gary Bettman and say, well, he's the reason. No, Bettman, there would have been Stanley Cups. Great. Cool. The problem is, and where it falls apart is, which team would have won a Stanley Cup if not for Gary Bettman? And then you get into all these diverging topics, and I know 2004, people will mention 2011, people will mention other Stanley Cup finals. But in essence, there's always going to be that easy solution or that easy explanation of, well, it's Bettman. If they get rid of Bettman, then Canada will be great. The reality is that the Canadian franchises have had their stops and starts, and some of them have gone through some really, really big down points. So we'll just go through the playoff results. I know there may be one or two here and there that are wrong on this board. I apologize for that. I know whenever I do boards which are this involved, there's going to be a number or two that maybe I get wrong. These are the standings according to Hockey Reference. So if there's some other site people using, or actually this team finished, it's fine. So Montreal, 1994, defending Stanley Cup champions. They lost in the first round against Boston. That was in 7. They lost in the first round in 96 and 97, in 6 against the Islanders and then 5 against the Devils. Then they got swept in 98 in round 2 by the Buffalo Sabres. Then they didn't make the playoffs again until 2002. They lost in the second round in 6 against Carolina. They got swept in 2004 in the second round by Tampa. And then in 06, they lost in the first round in 6 against Carolina. So Carolina beating them twice in 4 years. 2008, they lost in the conference final against Philadelphia in 5. 2009, they got swept in the first round by Boston. 2010, they lost in the conference final in 5 against Philadelphia. So they don't like playing Philadelphia is what we learned. 2011, they lost in the first round against Boston in 7. 2013, they lost in the first round against Ottawa in 5. 2014, they lost in the conference final against the Rangers in 6. There was some controversy in that, I know. 2015, they lost in the second round against Tampa in 6. 2017, they lost in the first round against the Rangers in 6. 2020, they lost in the first round against Philadelphia after getting out of the qualifying round against Pittsburgh, but they lost against Philadelphia in 6. So that's Philadelphia. It's on the board 3 times here. Philadelphia shows up on here. I think Philadelphia shows up. Nope. Philadelphia does not show up as the team that's the bane of the existence, the Ottawa Senators, just the other Pennsylvania team. But Tampa Bay in 2021, of course, extinguished Montreal's hopes in the Stanley Cup final in 5 games. Montreal, severe underdogs in that series, and Tampa Bay kind of, just took them apart. That being said, it was a great run, and then, of course, that was the end for Carey Price in many ways. I mean, I know he came back and played a few games after, but Price hasn't been the same since then, and Shea Weber hasn't played a game since then either. So for Montreal, they've been kind of stuck. Now, if we look at the standings for Montreal, they've been top 10 in standings 7 times. And I went with top 10 because that's got to be your contending spot, right? So they were number 9 in the league in 1994 and 1996. Both years they lost in the first round. 2008, they were the number 3 team in the league. They lost in the conference final against Philly. 2013, they were the number 4 team in the league. They lost in the first round against Ottawa. 2014, they were the number 10 team in the league, lost in the conference final against the Rangers. 2015, the number 2 team in the league. That's where they lose against Tampa Bay in the second round. And they were the number 8 ranked team in 2017, where they lost in the first round against the Rangers. So they've been top 10, grand total of 7 times. They've been 21 through 30 plus in the standings 8 times. Number 24 in 2001, number 21 in 2003, number 28 in 2012, number 22 in 2016, number 28 in 2018, number 24 in 2020, number 32 in 2022, the last ranked team in the league, and this year they're back up to the number 28 spot. So it's hard to contend for a Stanley Cup spot when you're going through a rebuild, as Montreal is currently. But there's talk. I always see Montreal is the one that, the curse comes from the Patrick Roy era. They're going to be the team that has to break that curse and win the cup. Sure, why not? It's as good a theory as any. Then we get to Toronto. 1994, they lost in the conference final in 5 games against Vancouver. That series was fantastic. 1995, I say that as a Canuck fan, honest and true. Round 1, they lost against Chicago in 7 in 1995. Chicago would make a lot of Canadian fans mad that year. 1996, they lost in the first round against St. Louis in 6. I say that because Chicago knocked out the Vancouver Canucks in the next round. 1999, they lost in the conference final against Buffalo in 5. 2000, they lost in the second round against New Jersey in 6. They lost against New Jersey second round again the following year in 7. 2002, they lost against Carolina in the conference final in 6. 2003, they lost in round 1 against Philadelphia in 7. 2004, they lost against Philadelphia, this time in 6, this time in the second round as well. They got out of the first round by knocking out Ottawa that year. 2013, they lost in the first round against Boston in 7. 2017, it was the first round against Washington in 6. And then in 2018 and 2019, they repeated what they did in 2013, losing to Boston in 7 games. 2020, they lost in, I've got round 1, but it was the qualifying round between them and Columbus. It was a 5-game, 3-2 series win for Columbus. 2021, they lost in the first round against Montreal in 7. 2022, they lost in the first round against Tampa Bay in 7. And this year they lost in the second round in game 5. So 4-1 against Florida, that being in round 2. But it doesn't feel like they advanced. Now for Toronto, it's interesting because they're top 10 more than any team on this board. In terms of Canadian teams, they're consistently good and they're pretty bad when they want to be as well. So they have 12 times they've been top 10 in the league. The highest they've been, they were 3rd in 2002. They were 4th last year. They were 5th this year, 5th in 2004, 5th in 1994 and 1999 amongst those 12 top 10 finishes, which is much better than anybody else on the board. So maybe it's Toronto that has the best chance, right? However, they've also been bad. In 1997, they were 23rd. 2008, they were 24th. 2009, 24th. 2010, 29th. 2011, 22nd. 2012, 25th. 2014, 22nd, 2015, 27th, and of course 2016, as planned, they finished last in the league at 30th and won the draft lottery to get Austin Matthews. And since then, they've been top 10 in the league in 2018, 2019, 2021, 2022, and 2023. The only time they're not in the top 10, 2020, in and amongst all those years. But still, they're a contending team. But they've been bottom 10, or well, I mean in the bottom from 21 down 9 times, which is one of the higher numbers on the board, although the Oilers and the Canucks are ahead of them there. But they've also gone through 8 GMs, and this is something to look at. And I was trying to make sure I wasn't picking interim GMs. There's a possibility an interim GM slips in here. But the Montreal Canadiens have had 7 general managers. Toronto's had 8. And now we're talking about whether or not Kyle Dubas is going to stick around. Way too many GMs. And at some point, you have to let him go. Looking at Nashville, David Poile, I know Nashville hasn't won a cup, but how long was Poile there? And then Poile just steps down. Now Barry Trotz has got however long he wants. I do think that in Canadian markets, we fire GMs probably a little bit too quickly. Then we get to Vancouver, a team that's gone through its share of GMs as well. Not as many as Toronto or Montreal, but still. It's usually a big deal, and it's usually... I want to say celebrated when a GM change happens in Vancouver, but not for very long. So 1994, of course, Vancouver goes to the final. They lose in 7 against the Rangers. I remember hearing some Canuck fans after that about how that series was fixed and it was to get the Rangers their cup. And yeah, the Canucks came back from 3-1 down, couldn't complete the comeback. 1995, they lost in the second round against Chicago in 4 straight. 1996, they lost in the first round against Colorado in 6. 2001, they get back to the playoffs, lose against Colorado in 4 straight. 2002, they get back to the playoffs, they lose against Detroit 4-2. They won the first 2 games in that one. 2003, they lost in the second round against Minnesota 4-3. They were up 3-1 in that series. 2004, they lost in the first round against Calgary in 7. I worked during Game 7. I was happy about it. 2007, they lost in the second round against Anaheim in 5. Seriously, I missed that game and I was like, cool. But yeah, lost round 2 against Anaheim in 5. 2009, they lost in the second round against Chicago. That was in 6. 2010, they lost in the second round against Chicago, also in 6. 2011, after not giving up that 3-0 series lead and losing in 7, but very, very close against Chicago, they go all the way to the final and then lost in Game 7 against Boston. They did have a 3-2 series lead in that one. 2012, they lost in the first round against LA in 5. LA went all the way to the Cup. 2013, they got swept in the first round by San Jose. 2015, they lost round 1 against Calgary in 6. And 2020, They lost in the second round in 7 against the Vegas Golden Knights. I say they, but it was Demko who pushed Vegas to 7 games in that series. So Vancouver, when they make the playoffs, they can be dangerous as underdogs. They've made it to 2 Stanley Cup finals, but still no championship, right? Now for Vancouver, they've been top 10 9 times since 1994. 2003, 2004, they were the number 7 team in the league both years. And I think, Canuck fans got excited in the West Coast Express and all this, but there were still weaknesses with that team that cost them in the playoffs. 2007, they were 8th in the league. 2009, they were 7th in the league. 2010, they were 5th. And then 2011 and 2012, they won President's Trophies. So, when it comes to President's Trophies and the curse as it applies to Canadian teams, Vancouver's had it twice, Ottawa's had it once. 2013 and 2015, Vancouver was 8th overall in the NHL. So that's 9 times they've been top 10, more than Montreal, more than Calgary, more than Edmonton, Ottawa, or Winnipeg. But Winnipeg, they haven't been there that long, and they were the Thrashers. So when we look at finishing 21 and lower in the league, Vancouver 24th in 1998, 26th in 1999. There were 26 teams in the league, and that year was just awful. 2008, they were 21st overall. 2014, they were 25th. 2016, 28th. 2017, 29th. 2018, 26th. The year after, they were 23rd. 2020, they weren't bad. And then 2021, they were 24th. And this year, 22nd. So 2022, they didn't actually finish 21st or lower in the NHL. That's a win if you're Vancouver. That's 10 times they've been in that bottom from 21 below. And that is one of the higher numbers. Actually, Ottawa's got more too. I did mention earlier. There's a lot of Canadian teams that finish in that bottom of the league spot. Getting to Calgary here. So we'll talk about Calgary. Calgary's been very much a feast or famine team. So 1994, they lost in the first round against Vancouver 4-3. That was the series they led 3-1, and Vancouver won the next 3 in overtime. That's where the Cardiac Canucks term came along. And it gave Calgary a bit of a rep as a team that choked. 1995, they lost in 7 against San Jose in the first round. 1996, they got swept by Chicago in the first round, so there's the Hawks again. 2004, they get back to the playoffs. They lost in the Stanley Cup final in 7 against the Tampa Bay Lightning. 2006, they lost in the first round against Anaheim, again in 7. 2007, in Game 6, they lost against Detroit to lose that series in round 1. 2008, 7th game, they lost against San Jose. They don't like Game 7s in Calgary, I wouldn't think. But yeah, San Jose twice there with 7-game series wins over the Calgary Flames, separated by 13 years. 2009, they lost in the first round against Chicago in 6. 2015, they lose against the Anaheim Ducks in the second round in 5. That's when Anaheim owned them. Same in 2017, Anaheim sweeps Calgary in the first round. 2019, they lost in the first round against Colorado in 5, which was seen as an upset at the time. 2020, in the first round, they lose against Dallas 4-2, a series they could have won, maybe should have won, but they didn't. And then 2022, last year, they lost in the second round in the Battle of Alberta against the Oilers in 5. So for Calgary, it really has been, they have the one run to the final, but outside of that, they haven't got out of round 2. And then when you look at it, they've been top 10 6 times in the standings. 1994, 1995, and 2006, they were 7th overall in the standings. They were 10th overall in 2009, 2nd overall in 2019. Might have been their best chance, and then Colorado took them out. 2022, they were 6th in the NHL. But this is where the famine part comes in. So they were 21st in the league in 1997. That's 2 years after they were 7th overall. Then 98, they're 22nd. 2000, they're 22nd. 2022, they're 22nd. They like 22. They were 22nd again in 2003. 25th in 2013, 27th in 2014, and 26th in 2016. So when we see how often Canadian teams are just not good, this doesn't help when it comes to, winning Stanley Cups and building that tradition and attracting free agents. Free agents, a chance to win is a big thing. And Canadian markets might have a harder time selling that in many cases than some of the American counterparts. So 6 times they've been in the top 10, 8 times they've been in the bottom 10. They've had 6 GMs. Same as Vancouver, 6 full-time GMs. I didn't count Mike Keenan in there. He was acting, technically. He never became the full-time GM. Burke did, asked him for advice on the Bure trade, and then out he went. Calgary and Vancouver both with 6 GMs, Montreal with 7, Toronto with 8, and that's over this period of time from 94 until now. Then we get to the Oilers, and this is where things are interesting too, because the Oilers have been very hit and miss. And against Dallas, they don't like playing Dallas. 1997, they lost in the second round against Colorado in 5, and then it's all Dallas. 98, 99, 2000, 2001, 2003, they lost against Dallas. In round 2, 4-1 in the first set in 1998. And then it's first round all the way through. A sweep in 99, 5 games in 2000, 6 games in both 2001 and 2003. And then in 2006, they go all the way to the Stanley Cup Final. They lost in 7 against Carolina in the Stanley Cup Final, of course. 2017, they get back to the playoffs. They lost in the second round against Anaheim in 7. And that was the year that it felt like, hey, the Oilers are really close. This is a team that could very well win a Stanley Cup over the next couple of years. And then they missed the playoffs for the next couple of years. 2020, they get back in. They lost the qualifying round in 4 against Chicago. Then they lost in round 1 against Winnipeg in 21. 22, they lost in 4 straight in the conference final against Colorado. And 23, they lost in 6 games against Vegas. Of course, that series rounding out last night before I'm recording this. So for the Oilers, there's only been 3 times they've been top 10 in the NHL over this large swath of time. 2017 and this year, they were 7th overall. 2020, they were 9th overall. So we shouldn't be overly surprised they haven't broken through and won a Stanley Cup yet. They haven't had a dominant regular season. They've had dominant parts of regular seasons. They haven't had that really dominant regular season. Of the teams that are still alive at the time I'm recording this, you have Carolina that finished 2nd in the league and Vegas that finished 4th are 2 of the 5 teams still alive in these playoffs, telling you that finishing as one of the top teams, yes, there's the President's Trophy curse, but the number 2, number 4 teams are in pretty good shape. Vegas, of course, finished atop the West this year. So there's something to that, and I know them and Vegas were close to one another in the standings. But in the end, Vegas ends up being 4th. Edmonton ends up being 7th. And then when we look at years they were at the bottom, I don't want to have to go through all this, so I'm not going to necessarily. There's 14 times that the Oilers have been between 21st and last place in the league, whether it's 30th, 31st, or 32nd. 23rd in 94, 22nd in 95, 21st in 96. Then they go back into the playoffs, of course, for a while. They ended up falling back out. 2007, they were 25th overall. And then they're 30th in both 2010, 2011, 29th in 2012. So they only moved up 1 spot. The year that they drafted McDavid, they were actually 28th. So they won the draft lottery and moved up. And the following season, they actually got worse. They were 29th overall that year. And more recently, 2019, they were as low as 25th in the National Hockey League. And that was after the year that they made the playoffs in 2017 and we thought they were a contending team. It has been so hit and miss with Edmonton, and they've gone through 6 GMs as well. And so I don't see Ken Holland going anywhere. I don't see Jay Woodcroft going anywhere. I don't think anything's happened with Woodcroft behind the bench that would warrant getting rid of him. So, yeah, for the Oilers, they haven't been contending that long. And in terms of their spot as a contender, they haven't been a top 10 team in the league that often. And it feels like they're not far off. Adding Ekholm, I think, was brilliant. And if they make the right moves going forward, they should stay top 10 in the NHL. Ottawa. Ottawa's an interesting team. They come into the league. They're one of the worst expansion teams in history. But by 97, they got a lot better. They made the playoffs. They lost in the first round against Buffalo in 7. 98, they lost in the second round against Washington in 5. 99, they get swept by Buffalo in 4 in the first round. They go out in the first round in 2000 against Toronto in 6. 2001, they lost against Toronto. That was a sweep in the... And I still remember the jokes at work after that. Just because it felt like when Ottawa played Toronto, and remember, I'm rooting for Ottawa. It just felt like Ottawa was scared of Toronto. That Ottawa was doing really well, and then Toronto would get a goal, and they'd be like, I don't know, we're going to lose now, aren't we? And then in 2002, they got close, but in the second round, Toronto knocks them out in 7. 2003, they lost in the conference final against New Jersey in 7. 2004, they lost in the first round, also in 7 against Toronto. So Game 7's not friends of the Ottawa Senators fan base at that point. 2006, they lost in the second round against Buffalo. So Buffalo's on the board the third time. That was in 5. 2007, they lost in the Stanley Cup final against Anaheim, and that was in 5. And that's as close as Ottawa ever gets to that Stanley Cup championship. 2008, they lost in the first round in a sweep against Pittsburgh, and here come the Penguins. 2010, they lost in the first round against the Penguins in 6. 2012, they lost in the first round against the Rangers in 7. 2013, they lost in the second round against Pittsburgh in 5. 2015, they lost against Montreal in 6 in the first round. And 2017, they lost the conference final against Pittsburgh in 7, which is the most recent playoff for Ottawa fans, and to this day is a very painful memory for Ottawa fans as well. Now, when we look at top 10 and bottom 10, or, 21st and beyond, because now we have 32 teams just to mess the whole thing up. But top 10, they were 3rd in 1999, 10th in 2000, 4th in 2001, and they were the number 1 team in the league in 2003, and lost the conference finals that year against New Jersey. So they had a good run there. They were number 6 in 2004, number 2 in 2006, and number 9 in 2007. So they were just inside the top 10 the year they went all the way to the Stanley Cup final. But in terms of being at or near the bottom of the league, Ottawa's been there a lot. 1994, they were 26th. They stayed there for 95 and 96. There were 26 teams in the league, so they were the worst team in the league for a while. They were 23rd in 2009, 26th in 2011, 30th in 2018, so that is second to last in the league that year. 2019, they were 31st, so that's last. 30th the year after, 23rd the year after, 26th the year after, and this year, 21st. So they have been in that 21 and below from 2018 until now, and they're looking to break out of that. And that's the tricky thing. Again, as I've said before, tearing it down is easy, building it back up can be very difficult. So that's 7 times that Ottawa's been in the top 10, and 11 times they've been 21st or lower in the standings, and they've gone through 7 general managers. Then you get to Winnipeg, and this will be a nice quick one, because Winnipeg, their first playoff appearance, 2015, they lost in the first round against Anaheim in 5. 2018, they went to the conference final. They lost in 5 against the Vegas Golden Knights that year. 2019, they lost in the first round against St. Louis in 6. 2020, they lost the qualifying round against Calgary. That was in 4. 2021, they lost against Montreal in 4 straight in the second round. And this year, in the first round, they lose against Vegas in 5. And again, I'm only including the current Jets, not the former Jets in that, because it would look odd to have, 95 and then 2015. And just, it's again, the previous Jets from 1994 until they moved didn't really have a contending team, or a really miserably bad one either. So they've been top 10 in the league twice. 2018, they were second overall, right behind division rival Nashville, who they knocked out of the playoffs that year. And 2019, they were 10th. This was a team that felt like was building up to being a Stanley Cup contender year after year after year, and it really didn't work out that way. They've been in the 21 and beyond a few times. 2012, they were 22nd. 2014, they were 23rd. And 2016, they were 25th. So that's twice they've been in the top 10, and 3 times they've been 21st or lower in the standings. And they've only had the one GM. And with Kevin Cheveldayoff, it feels like he has 9 lives in Winnipeg. But I don't feel like Winnipeg's in really that much worse of a position than a lot of the other teams in Canada. And I don't know if we have a Canadian team that's going to break this. And I know people want to call it a curse, whatever you want to call it. I don't know that there's a Canadian team that I look at right now and think, well, clearly this team is going to break through and win that Stanley Cup. Edmonton, with the right moves, can. Toronto, with the right moves, can. What I'm seeing from a lot of media when it comes to the Maple Leafs is this. We know that change needs to happen. However, whenever you talk about any of those core 4 guys going, immediately that same media will say, well, no, we don't want to lose that guy. And I understand it. But for teams that get over the hump and win that Stanley Cup, tough decisions get made along the way. And I think tough decisions need to be made by the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I don't know who you keep and who you get rid of, but really, they're probably still in the best overall position, although the Oilers are right there. Montreal's building up. They're going to get a good player in this draft. They're going to be a good team. Vancouver, I have no idea what Vancouver's going to do. It's been so many years of mediocrity. I don't know. I don't know how much more we have to endure in this market. For Calgary, they're very hit and miss. I wouldn't be surprised if next year they're right back in the playoffs and they're one of the better teams in the West, because they do seem to be that way every other year. For the Sens, the rebuild, it feels like, should be over this coming season and they should be back in the playoffs. But Stanley Cup contender, I think you need a real bona fide number 1. And yet look at Vegas. Aiden Hill gets him into the third round. So, I mean, it's just getting hot at the right time, too. And then with the Jets, I have no idea what to expect going forward with the Jets because it feels like that core is going to get blown up. And once you blow up the core, you could end up in a situation where you're like the Ottawa Senators, or maybe if you do it right and it's not like just blowing the whole thing up, it's surgical precision with said roster, and you're just careful about what you keep and what you get rid of. Maybe Winnipeg gets better. But the question I have is the same question I have every year. Which of these teams ends up being a Stanley Cup contender? Which of these teams ends up being a Stanley Cup champion? In Canada, it does feel like there's more emphasis put on making the playoffs than winning the Stanley Cup. And in Canada, there's definitely more pressure on the players as well. There are definitely some fans in Canada that, are really, really, really into it and get pretty darn intense about their team, whether they win or they lose. I generally don't. I used to. There was a time, but eventually I was like, I'm tired of just being so upset and getting my heart broken. So I think I'm just going to chill out and just expect the failure. And I know that's an awful, awful, awful way to talk about it. And I hate to say it, but that is really how I feel about teams that I cheer for. Is I expect that other shoe to drop and things kind of fall apart because it's just happened so many times. So hopefully one of these Canadian teams will break through and win that championship. I don't think there's some big conspiracy to keep Canadian teams from winning. I've seen the whole, officiating in the playoffs and how it affects Canadian teams. I've seen all those arguments. I still think that we're going to see a Canadian team at some point go on a run, win a Stanley Cup. It's just a matter of when, at least to me. But let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I really hope I can retire this video next year. That'd be great. But let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I'll talk to you again soon.